Hola, Coolers. We're back again with another episode of Offside, the video podcast that we hold every week on Barca football. And this week, just like other weeks, we have another exciting person to profile of the famed La Masia. And seems like we are getting another golden generation. Whether they will be golden or not, only time will tell. But the excitement is pretty palpable. A few weeks back, we did Lamine Yamal, and thanks for everybody who watched that video. And today, we're going to, by now you would have guessed it, talk about the other sensation that has come up in this season, Pau Cubarsi. 17 years old, holding the back line and getting plaudits from the most senior pros out there who are literally taken aback at the calmness and the efficacy with which this little boy is playing. Dom, welcome.
Hey Dev, thanks for that intro. And yes, you're absolutely right. Pau Cubarsí is one of the clearest and best Barca performance as of late. And it's quite telling, really, that it's La Masia kids once more coming to Barca's rescue, which, historically speaking at least, should not be a surprise in the least. But here we are, and I'm pleased that it will once again be a largely positive video, a positive episode where we actually allow ourselves to gush over our players for a change, rather than necessarily just pointing out flaws and structural issues and so on. With that said, this video, as always, will be divided into tactical, analytical, and statistical parts. And just as we did with Lamine Yamal, the overall focus will be on Cubarsi's strengths rather than his weaknesses. I will mention some of his flaws. We will talk about them. Of course we will, because there are flaws. He's only 17 years of age. But exactly for that reason, we don't want to dwell on them too much. It just doesn't feel too healthy at this stage. We can acknowledge them. Of course we can, and we should, but let's not dwell on them too much as often. So here's the first tactics board, and you can actually see Cubarsi here on the ball in the back line, and Barcelona are actually getting pressed by the opposition. So you see all these players are trying to apply pressure on Barcelona and push them back into their own half. Now, what I'm going to talk here about is actually Cubarsi's technical base. What this means is just his ball playing ability, right? And this is very simple because people usually what they associate with ball playing abilities is the ability to break the lines and be very vertical in play, progress play forward. But what makes Cubarsi different from the likes of Araujo, for example, and I'll mention Araujo a couple of times today, not to be very malicious towards him or maybe to bash him, but because he is someone we can compare him to. Because Araujo, as good as he has been, as good as he has been in improving this particular aspect of his profile, he's not at the level of Cubarsi. Now, what makes Cubarsi special is the timing and the angle manipulation of his passes, right? So if this was, for example, Araujo, and all he did was pass the ball from here to this player over here, what will happen in this situation if the timing is not correct, if the angle is not right, and the power and the precision and the intent was not right? What will happen is this player would easily get pressurized by the player who's behind him. And what happens if this ball bounces off the player? If the precision is not right, power is not right, what happens next? The ball bounces off of him, and there are at least 3 players very close to him who can immediately collapse on the ball and immediately force a turnover for Barcelona and potentially endanger them on the counter. Now, that's where this timing and angle manipulation play a huge part in who Cubarsi is and the value that he brings to the team. So let's play this sequence out. Cubarsi is on the ball, and now he has several different options. He can pass the ball here, he can pass the ball here, or he can go a much more direct route and pass the ball over the top into runners, into target men, just get rid of the ball, send it forward. However, what he does, he gets his timing precisely right. Timing part is crucial. He waits for this player, and what happens when this player steps up? Space appears behind him. So this is the space that we need to access now. We need to play into the pressure. And Cubarsi waits. He puts his soul on the ball, and he invites the pressure forward. Now this player presses, leaves the space behind him, and immediately the Barca forward knows, okay, this is where I have to come in. And he drops, and now Cubarsi sees the player coming in. He sees the space opening, and he opens up his body. He manipulates his body just to be able to curve the ball around this player and into the space. Now, this is much, much better to execute than, for example, go straight into the player, be very vertical, be very quick, and then potentially risk this player in collapsing on top of the marker, forcing the bounce ball, and then forcing a good counter-pressing sequence that can endanger Barcelona's backline. So this is what Cubarsí does extremely well. He can do it on this side with the right foot. He can turn his body the other way. He can even do it with his weak foot, and that makes him extremely valuable. He can break lines with both feet, and he can make it with great timing and good manipulation and great technical base. This is Cubarsí in a nutshell. However, there's even more stuff that he does really well, which are principle based. They have principle based value, and I will explain this briefly. So there's two main principles that we have to mention here. The first one is the very cliche one, which is the ball is always faster than the man. So if Cubarsí was to progress play by carrying the ball forward, that will always be inherently slower than Cubarsí passing the ball forward and accessing those zones through passing by moving the ball and not moving himself. One other thing is, if he loses the ball when carrying it, what happens next? This player is straight in the face of the goalkeeper. He has only one line at best to break to get to the box and potentially endanger Barca's goal. However, if he passes the ball and the ball gets lost in this middle line right here, the danger, the risk is much lesser because the opposition now have to break at least two lines of defense to get to the goal, right? So that's number one, speed and risk management, right? So those are the two things that are very important with the first principle. The second principle is maximizing value. So let's say that Cubarsí sends the ball to, I don't know, maybe Frenkie de Jong or Pedri in this area right here. And Pedri or Frenkie are types of players who can turn the man and progress into the final third by manipulating their body and the ball and evading the instant pressure. What happens if Frenkie de Jong receives the ball here, turns with the ball, and advances here? He only has one line left, which is the back line, to break to get a clear chance on goal. But on the other side of things, what happens if Frenkie de Jong is forced into the back line and he has to carry the ball forward from this area and break this line of pressure from the opposition? Even if he's successful, even if that succeeds, he still has at least two more lines of pressure to break to get to a very good situation to advance the goal. There is much more value if Frenkie de Jong or Pedri or Gundogan or Gavi are accessed in this area right here than the necessity of them bringing the ball up from the back line. Also, as we said, there's much less risk in it because Frenkie, if he loses the ball here, the opponent just goes on goal. But if he loses the ball here in this area right there, there's much less risk and much more value. And Cubarsí allows this because he's a very steady, a very calculated, very brave player from the back line who gets to access these zones much more regularly, much more consistently than someone like, again, I'm going to name drop Araujo because he is someone who has to improve on this much more than someone like Christensen. But Cubarsí brings the stability. He brings this type of consistency into Barca's back line and the whole structure that Xavi wants to implement. And that's why this principle-based value is so high with this young lad.
Everybody who watches Cubarsí says the same thing about him, but you explained it pretty well. My only question is, if we think about the future of Barca and we think about the future backline, and if that's Araujo and Cubarsí, how are they complementary?
If you have a Barcelona team who is going to pin the opposition back, they rely on the progression of the center back. They always do. So we have, for example, Araujo on this side, we have Cubarsí on this side. And what they do is they complement each other because they plug each other's holes, right? So Cubarsí is better on the ball, Araujo is better off the ball. So if they play a high line and they need to pin the opposition back by moving the ball very quickly, Cubarsí can do that. Araujo can do it too, maybe not as proficiently, maybe not as consistently as Cubarsí, but they're both high line defenders and they both have certain strengths that complement or maybe mask the other's flaws, right? So they can bring different things to the table while at the same time being players who can play with all of this space behind them. So if this is the space that the opposition can exploit, both Cubarsí and Araujo have the profiles to keep the opposition pinned in possession, but also being able to track back and be these highline defenders when it comes to just defending the space in behind and ensuring that Barca are well covered both in possession but also out of possession. Cubarsí is someone who is very deceptively physical player. So if he's in this high line, he doesn't seem like a player who can defend all of this space. He doesn't seem like a defender who can run in big strides or potentially be someone who can impose himself physically. Now, why I say is deceptive because he is someone who's 6 feet tall here and there. Different sources tell different numbers. However, let's say he's 6 feet tall, which is just tall, but not necessarily center back tall. When you think of tall and big, physically imposing center backs, Cubarsí wouldn't necessarily be among those bunch. However, he is deceptively so because he can impose himself. He can make himself be bigger than he actually seems with the intent, with the aggression, with the actual his defensive fundamentals, which I will talk about in a second here. Now, he is someone who is very quick to burst from a standstill and cover this very large distance of ground. He's someone who eats the ground really well and someone who can impose himself in duels as well. And this is due to his defensive fundamentals. I've put here his hands and knees because when he engages in duels, he will crunch his knees, he will kick his legs, and he will extend them in every different angle to be able to reach the ball, even if his opponent is much physically stronger and bigger than him. He will use his hands in motion. If these two players are in a foot race, for example, Cubarsí will use his hands to cover and to make up for that deficiency in physicality. This is always very risky because there can be a foul called by the referee. However, knowing how to use his hands in these situations without causing a foul is very crucial for defenders who are trying to compensate for the lack of physical prowess, let's call it that way. Although he doesn't really have to that much because he's still quite physical, as we said he is. Now, I want to talk about his intelligent movement and highline proficiency, right? Because in this situation right here, you have to be very smart. This player is on the ball and he is in a lot of space and time. And when a defender sees this action, when he sees his opponent with a lot of space and time, let's say this is Cubarsí's line of sight. Right? So he is seeing what's in front of him, and he sees this defender right here. I'll put an arrow on him. Let's say this defender is in a lot of time and space on the ball. What you have to do as a defender, which is a fundamental trait, is you have to know when to back off and when to push forward. If the play is facing your way and the opponent is in space and time, you have to start your run backwards because you anticipate there's going to be a ball coming in over the top into the space behind you. And he knows this. He understands this fundamental thing. And even though this player right here has the dynamic advantage, which means that he starts his run sooner and he can reach his top speed quicker than Cubarsí. Cubarsí manages to nullify this head start by just reading the game much better than, let's say, an average defender would. And then he can start his backtracking quite quickly. And then what happens is he can reach this opponent in time for the ball to be cleared. And then he uses these defensive fundamentals, his hands, his knees, his tackling technique to kick the ball out of play and snuff out a very dangerous situation that could have caused Barca a lot of danger. So even though he's not physically imposing, as some other center backs should maybe be, at least historically, or maybe, I know, your classical center backs should be, he still manages to complement his other or use his other fundamentals, his other traits to mask this flaw. Now, I also want to talk about front foot defending because he is someone who is very proactive. He's someone who will push up, who will not usually wait for the opponent to get the ball. He will not usually be passive in his approach. So he will try and get ahead of the play and stop the play before it even develops, which is what we said about Araujo as well. He thinks ahead and he trying to predict where the danger will eventually be to snuff it out before it even happens. And this is the essence of Cubarsí, the defender. Even though he has some physical disadvantages, he makes up for them through intelligent movement, through front foot defending, and through good defensive fundamentals.
I think this was what we saw against the game Mallorca just a couple of days back, and his ability marshalling that high line and in managing somebody like Vedat Murici. It's hard to tackle for any defender out there. I think he did pretty well. The way he managed it with Koundé and Christensen mostly, I think that was pretty remarkable. And most of these traits and tenets actually came through. And later when we see the stats, we will see his affinity for covering ground in the way that you just talked about. So the stats and the data back up what the eye test has seen, as you always say. And it's pretty evident that's how he compensates for his supposed lack of physique and so on and so forth. That said, he's just 17 years old, so he's not fully developed, fully grown. So what he can be when he's 21 or 22 or in his prime in 25, no one knows. But having said that, at 17, this vision that he has, his ability, as you talked about in the last tactical analysis, where you explained his game reading, and now when you think about how he can manipulate his body and the space that he has to snuff out challenges. That's what really makes him stand apart. And hopefully, injuries are all right, and he can become the player that many are saying that he can become. And if he does, then probably he's the closest thing to a PK replacement that we would possibly have to marshal that Highline in the way Barca have always wanted to.
Absolutely. I do agree. I mean, he is young, so there is still scope for him to develop physically and mentally, of course, and as a player who's capable on the ball and off the ball. But when it comes to his weaknesses, the thing that I've noticed him struggle with are two things. So his aerial timings can be off. So he's not exactly a player who is, we said, he's not really that tall, so he has to compensate through intelligent traits, which is timing. One of those is timing. So if the ball is coming in here, and this player is, let's say this player is physically imposing and physically more developed than Cubarsi, Cubarsi has to get his timing absolutely right to be able to out jump this player and win the header. Now, that often doesn't happen. He can often get shrugged off the ball. And another thing is, if this ball is coming in through here and the forward has managed to back into Cubarsi with his back, as strong as Cubarsi is, he struggles when players lean back into him. He can use his feet, he can crush his knees, and maybe somehow get the ball through different angles. But when it comes to controlling these players and winning these duels when players lean back into him, he struggles with it. Now, as I've said, I don't want to dwell on this because he can still develop, he can still improve. And this is not something that we want to highlight as much when it comes to such a young player. But it's good to know, good to keep at the back of our minds that this is something that could potentially be improved upon.
So what we've done is just like all the other videos, we've tried to see Cubarsi on his own on what are some of his specific capabilities as Dom talked about and how the data stacks up. But then we have also measured and compared him across 5 of the top elite CBs in the world today for this season. Not their whole playing time, but for this season, because this is the first season that Cubarsi is having in pro football. With that, let's get started. So Dom talked about, winning defensive duels in the own third, and you can look into it. Look at the sliding tackles that Dom talked about, of crunching his knees and so on. So he does utilize that more often than not to try and capitalize on a situation or control a situation. And if you look at the number of defensive duels that he is doing, look at the space that he's covering, right? It's on the left, it's on the right, it's at the base of that Highline that he marshals, and he's everywhere. So his ability to cover that space is pretty much evident from this visual and graph. If you look at the recoveries, again, the use of the sliding tackle in doing recoveries to compensate for his physicality, the way he manages it is pretty evident if you look into the number of sliding tackles that are happening in his own third, almost up till that center line where Barca generally try to hold their high line. We look at interceptions, and if you look at counter pressing, what I liked about this was even his counter pressing is pretty good because he goes pretty far up the pitch, if you think about it, for him to control that kind and then move up and do that progression. And we'll see the progression stats that they actually stack up. That's a complete player that you're talking about, a ball playing defender, which is what Barca have always been talking about. Arao's amazing, but he probably does not have it at this quality or quantity. Here, Cubarsi definitely stands out among all the defenders that we have in Barca at this moment. Losses, yes, there are losses, but look at the space covered in where the losses are happening. It's all across the pitch, which means he has the ability to even do box to box if needed. And if at 17 he can do this, by the time he really matures his game, this will only become much better. Not just that, he will contribute to the attack. And I'm pretty much confident about that, that once he develops his game, he will not only just be the person marshalling that high line, but also contribute to that attack, something that PK used to do all the time. I'm not saying that he and PK are the same, but a similar kind of presence at our back, right? Who can also contribute to the attack if required in time. And then there's the ball progression. And this is where I think he really stands out. Look at that map, right, Dom? And I'll pass it on to you to just talk about these 4 slides before we go into comparison. But this definitely shows his ability or understanding of the game and his ability on long passing, medium passing. As Dom pointed out, the ball always travels faster than the man. And this graph shows it so well.
Exactly. This is precisely what Barca want their center backs to do. not just center backs, but this principle of moving the ball rather than moving yourself is very important because, as we said, it maximizes value, it minimizes risk, and Cubarsí does it really well. Just one progressive run in the sea progressive passes, it's a good thing for a center back, especially when you consider the Barca have a very leaky defensive structure. They cannot really allow their center backs to be that aggressive in their movement, in their passing, perhaps movement less. And also, just to quickly analyze the previous graphs, I think the value of Cubarsi's tackling and defending duels is in the zones that he marshals. So it's always the central zones. He does go wide, left and right, and that's fine because he can snuff out danger in all the zones on the sides as well. However, he marshals the central zone and the zone 14 and just inside the box, which are crucial. And the defender has to, especially a central defender, has to be able to do that. And Cubarsí does it really well, despite sometimes having the physical disadvantage. When I say that, I don't mean that he's physically weak, but for a centre back, there's always scope for more, and hopefully he does get to that stage as he matures, as he grows physically and mentally.
Cannot agree with you more. So now let's go back and check how he's faring with absolutely elite defenders. So what I did was I did it across passing, possession, and defensive actions so that we could look at his whole profile and the data that supports it. And I took 5 players. I took Cubarsí, Saliba, Van Dijk, Guardiola, and Silva from Benfica. These are probably the top 5 most elite CBs at this moment. Silva is still 19, so it's young, and that gives a good reference point. But if you look into total pass completion per 90, this guy is holding it with the likes of Van Dijk, more than Guardiola, slightly lesser than Saliba and Silva. But this is elite level. There's no question. If you look at short pass completion, if you look at medium pass completion, if you look at long pass completion, he's right there among the top elite CBs of the world at the age of 17.
I'm just very glad that these players, we talk about stats and how they're influenced by team environment and tactics and also the state of the teams. And these are all players who play at teams who like to have the ball mostly and like to be the dominating side. So it's a fair comparison despite different tactics, different philosophies, slightly different philosophies. So I'm really glad to see that even in a struggling Barcelona, when ranked against people who play in similar environments or similar tactics, he still manages to be among the best. And I'm very happy to see that is true across a different palette of passes. So not just short passes, not just medium passes, but all the 3 categories here are very high. And that just brings me a lot of joy. I'm sure it does to everyone watching this.
All right, let's keep going. Now, as we talked about, Barca has always wanted a defender who can also contribute to the attack. Now, Cubarsí is not there yet, but he's trying. You can see the passes into final third. That's 4.3 passes per 90 that he's passing into the final third. That's not a small number given the state in which Barcelona is. If this was a more functional Barcelona side, I'm pretty much confident that this number would have been a lot more higher. And if you look at the progressive passes as well, right, per 90 that he is doing, if De Jong had to cover that, he had to break 2 lines of resistance and press. But when you have somebody like Cubarsí that can actually free the midfield to be more attacking, to break the line of press a lot more easier. This is on defensive actions. So again, same set of players, and I'm looking at tackles 1 per 90. This guy is above Saliba, above Van Dijk, almost close to Guardiola, lesser than Silva. If you look at defensive third tackles, he's number 1. Against this quality of players at the highest level compared to these really elite CBs that are out there in the game today. Challenges 1, again, he's number 1. And this is something good about Cubarsí. He does not challenge often, not a single yellow card till now. And we'll see that in the stats. The number of challenges he does is less, but the percentage of win is the highest among them all. Now, percentage is high because he does it less. But at the same time, you have to think about the timing, the moment, the understanding, and the reading of the game to get it right. Tackle plus interception, again, if you look into the whole thing, both the prospect tackles and interception, he's really covering the ground when it comes in comparison to all these brilliant CVs out there. Yellow cards per 90, 0. He's been playing some games in La Liga, and it's not easy with the La Liga forward line and our midfield. But he's not actually got a single yellow card till now. And that's important. To be a clean CV, it's a huge benefit right? You think about the days of Nesta and Maldini and so on and so forth. Not saying he's that, but think about the cleanliness with which they played. Fouls committed per 90, yes, he does, but it's not that high a number. He's still with the elites. He's like Van Dijk. Possession won per 90. When he tackles, the team actually wins back possession. And that is one of the central traits of Barcelona. And he's better than Saliba, better than Van Dijk this season, almost equivalent to Guardiola. And then loose ball recoveries. This he has to work on to have that understanding, to have that reading when there's a second ball or that loose ball. How do you go and capture that? But I think that'll come with time. Back to you, Tom.
I think you nailed it there. Not much to add. He is someone who's becoming very proficient in all of these categories, which is, of course, it makes us hopeful and optimistic for the future. But yes, context, again, important. But Barca are a team, as you said, they suffer a lot in defense. And Cubarsí is often forced to save us, just like Araujo is as well. They're both forced to save us more often than not. And just to be able to do that at 17 years of age and do it cleanly, as you said, without many yellow cards. Yes, he does fouls, makes fouls, but it's normal. Sometimes there's even tactical fouls, which we have to take into consideration as well. But he does it cleanly. He does it really consistently. And I think these stats, they all, of course, they need the context. They need a team environment. You need to understand that. We do get that. That is absolutely valid. But just to be able to see how he stacks up on these elite against these elite center backs, it's encouraging. It really is.
All right. And then now let's go into possession, which is the most important thing that I think separates him from everybody else. So let's look into what possession means. Touches per 90. He's above any of them, all of them. That's the number of time he's touching the ball. And the number of passes somebody actually receives after he has made that pass is again better than all these CBs. And this in a perpetually broken Barcelona team, which doesn't have a midfield, which doesn't have a functioning forward line, is still doing what Dom talked about earlier. His understanding of where the beat person might be, his understanding of ball angle, positioning, sending that ball and putting it in a place where they're not under the press, where they're able to receive the ball cleanly and progress play. And this data shows that so clearly, and that aligns with what we saw earlier in the video when Dom was talking about these traits of his when he was on the tactics board. Take-ons attempted per 90, take-ons 1 per 90. His attempts are not that much because what I've seen is he does not necessarily go into a tackle very easily. He watches, he waits, he likes to time his stuff, but look at that win percentage. When he does, he wins. Compared to everybody else, he will have to play a lot more to be at that level. So their percentages are weighed down by the amount of hours and minutes that they have played. He has played less, but at the same time, winning it at 100% shows the ability of a 17-year-old kid to understand timing, to understand when to do what, and then ensure a positive outcome.
So when he actually exits his line and goes for with the ball, he's very successful. That's a great thing to have. And we saw it against Mallorca as well. We saw him break the lines with passes, but also when he sees the opportunity, he can do it with runs as well. We said it's more risky. It's not as optimal as passing the ball, but he can still do it. And having that ability translates well to him potentially being deployed in slightly different roles. We talked about his John Stones capabilities. Maybe he can even do that in the future. Let's not rush there. We will not go and say he can definitely be that someone, but there are still fundamentals that can be built upon for the future roles that he may have at Barcelona.
And I really like this. Saliba and Van Dijk, if you look at their numbers and you look at Cubarsi's numbers on take-on specifically, these two are defenders who really delay their tackle till the last minute. They will really wait for the tackle to happen. And he has that capability. Obviously, he has to mold it. The coaches who come in have to teach him and he has to become better. But the fact that he has that is insane at this age. Okay, carries per 90. If you look into it, highest among all of these people. And that's crazy for a 17-year-old. Right? That's the number of carries that he's doing per 90. If you look at progressive distance, only Silva is above him. He's higher than Saliba, higher than Van Dijk. So if you think about the possession game, he understands how to progress the game. And if he can do this so well, think about when we have a functional pivot or a double pivot, how much more freedom that person will have to contribute to our attack, which currently we don't have because we would possibly have a Christensen or a De Jong deep into our halves, running with the ball for whatever amount of time and ultimately getting dispossessed. If we can actually safeguard that and get them the space to play up front, and help with the Gundos and the Pedris to be more effective in the box, then imagine the benefit that our strikers, our nines, the cutbacks, all of that becomes so much more beneficial. Back to you, Tom.
I agree. There's an inherent risk with progressive carries. We talked about this earlier on, but there's also a reward, right? If you carry the ball well without getting dispossessed, obviously, what you do is you leave your position. Of course, you leave space behind you, but you also force the opposition to collapse on top of you, which means they have to empty their positions as well, which then leaves space behind their backs as well. And Kubarsi is someone who can carry the ball without getting dispossessed, and then using his passing intelligence, reading of the game, to access the space that had been left behind by the collapsing defenders. That brings immense value to the team. It's riskier, yes, it is. We talked about this, and maybe not as optimal for our midfielders and the risk that we're bringing on, but it has a lot of value if done correctly, and he seems to be doing it quite well.
We looked at the data, we looked at the stats, we looked at the tactical analysis. I'm going to pass it back to Dom to bring it home.
That was very interesting, and I think we can all be quite hopeful looking forward. We can be optimistic because we do have at least a couple of these youngsters, of these players that kind of they make us believe, they make us feel hopeful looking forward. And I think that's something to hold on to, something to build on when it comes to the future of this club. I know it's not always a sunshine and rainbows with Barcelona. It rarely is actually these days, but these players, they make us believe, and I feel this is something to hold on to. And I hope that you have enjoyed this analysis. We have, and we love to bring you some positivity on the timeline. And these youngsters, they actually do that quite well. So with that, people, I think we have to close this episode, and thank you for watching. If you haven't, please subscribe. It helps us a lot. Check out the blog and the podcast. We're doing a lot of work, a lot of content. We hope that you like it and that you will stay with us as we continue this journey. And until the next time, as always, stay safe and Visca el Barça.